All right. So the big bad evil guy won the initiative, and he's going to try to do some damage by making an attack on your glass cannon. I'm just going to roll my favorite blue die here, and we're going to see what happens.
Oh my gosh, it's my turn. This is my chance to shine.
And, oh, that's a natural 20.
Wait,
So
what?
you're going to, huh?
That's that's not what you actually rolled. That was a natural 4.
Yeah, so we're going to do double damage. It's a critical hit.
Why?
So,
But why?
yeah, because
Why am I
yeah.
even here if you're not gonna use me?
Today we're going to be talking about DMs cheating on JNJtabletop.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another J&J Tabletop video. My name is Jake, of course. With me as always is Josh, and we're going to talk about the topic of cheating in Dungeons and Dragons, specifically dungeon masters. Like, is that something that they can do if they're empowered to make decisions and change rules as they see fit? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about different ways in which that can happen, and hopefully you can walk away from this video with a much better understanding of how that's done and when is a good time to do that.
And just as a disclaimer, the purpose of this video is not to discourage DMs from making judgment calls for their games. It's intended to help DMs understand what those decisions mean. So exactly like Jake said, so you could better understand when it's time to change something and when it's time to leave something the way it's set up. The rules exist to establish a baseline. Deviating from that is fine, and it should be done sometimes. If you do it too much, then sometimes the rules just start to not matter. Why are we playing this game with this set of rules if we're not using any of them?
Exactly. It's like the points and whose line is it anyway? We keep going there, but
Yeah.
the points are made up, the rules are made up, and none of it
And the
matters.
points don't matter. Yep.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like fudging dice rolls, right?
So, Josh, is that okay? Like, should a DM fudge dice rolls?
So the answer to this question is complicated, right? As with the answer to most of these questions probably will be. Is it okay? Sometimes. Generally, probably no. I think there are moments when it's okay.
Yeah, that makes me think, the web DM video on this topic is actually really good. Big surprise there. Where Jim Davis talks about when do you fudge dice rolls? Well, a great time to change something is if you feel like the real life relationships that you have at the table might be negatively affected by it. The last thing you want to do is hurt somebody's feelings over a game. Maybe someone's having like an awful day or something, and it's just like the last thing they need to do is to get crit 7 times in one round. Like there's
Yeah.
things that are kind of just, we're all human. We're trying to have fun here.
If I'm rolling like crit after crit after crit, at a certain point, that kind of takes the fun out of it. But for me as a DM, and I would think it takes the fun out of it for the players too, if you're just getting critted upon.
Yeah, and actually, as a player, if that happens, even if it is naturally happening, yeah, I feel like you almost can't help but think like, that's your third crit this round, really? Like,
Exactly.
okay,
Yeah.
sure.
So maybe that 20 is a 17 instead, just to, so it still hits, but I'm not going to destroy the entire party in 3 rounds or 4 rounds.
Basically, like wild statistical outliers that just seem to
Mhm.
be happening in front of everybody.
Yeah, like your NPC that has like a +1 to a certain stat. The party's magic user is trying to do something that has a save or suck outcome, and you're just 19, 19, 19, like one after the other. It's
Oh,
like,
the
when it
pain.
gets to a certain point, like your players are using like all of their resources, and they have this really cool thing they want to do. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes you just got to be like, ah, they just failed.
And it's not something that maybe you might even consider if it's like, unless it's like all only happening to one caster. Like if there's two or three
Yes.
casters in the group and like everything that this one character is trying to do just fails every time,
Hmm.
that's a time when I would consider it. Does that mean I'm guaranteed to do it? No. I'm going to read the situation too. Some players actually are glutton for punishment, and I think once in a while, Josh, I feel like I kind of fit in that category a little bit, where I'm like, yeah, do the nasty thing. It's funny. Like, let's see what everybody else how they react to it.
But yeah, I mean that is another side to that, right? Like sometimes you have to ask yourself the question, why am I rolling the dice? Like if you already knew what outcome you wanted to have at the end, why are you rolling that die? And that's why we say sometimes. This is not something that should happen every session. Really shouldn't happen that many times throughout a campaign. Yeah, I don't know. It gets to a certain point where if you're changing so many of the dice rolls so often, maybe play a story game or something like that, or just do improv with your friends. On the subject of fudging dice rolls and damage rolls and maybe playing story games instead of D&D, I've seen a lot of tweets about this one specific subject, which is DMs just not using hit points at all. They just wait until the moment feels right. And speaking of feels right, if this video feels right and you feel like you're enjoying the content, then check out our past catalog of content because we have a whole lot of it. But as far as DMs just not using hit points at all, Jake and I are kind of on the same page about this. I think Jake feels a little bit more strongly than
Yeah,
I might do. I
maybe.
might feel. But the one thing I will say before I let Jake get on his soapbox here is if this is something you want to do as a DM, you need to talk to your players about this in a session 0 because it is just outright wrong for you to do this without talking to them about it beforehand. They're on the same page, totally fine. Everybody plays the game their own way. That's whatever. Doesn't make sense to me. That's okay. But Jake, how do you feel about DMs who don't use hit points at all?
I don't like it. I don't like it. There are DMs out there that are they're just flat out more interested in telling their story than they are in letting it truly be collaborative. I mean, they even could be great storytellers, and maybe the story they would tell is like better. Like, ooh, this is a more dramatic story. But like victory is hollow, defeat means nothing. Like there's just like why like with fudging dice rolls, like why are you even bothering to do that at all? Like I didn't beat the dragon, you just said I did. It's not helping anyone. It's like worse than being railroaded. Like it's not creative. I personally think it's lazy DMing because I feel like instead of learning how to balance an encounter, which we have a video on that, you should check it out, but instead of learning how to balance an encounter, they're just like, whatever, I'll just throw this out there because it's cool. And if I think they deserve to kill it based on something fun they did or cool they did, then yeah, that's no, like that's like an active attack on player agency. That's like the basic foundation of why D&D is fun. Like nobody knows what's going to happen next. That's why it's awesome. So, like you said earlier, like if everybody wants to do this, then I think that's fine. But at the same time, like just no, why would you do that?
Even if, and I know this is different. This is not for me. This is not for you, right? And that's fine for people to. There's no one way to play the game. But if I were a player in this sort of game, I just it just feels like a huge breach of trust for me as a player. I'm just going to be thinking about like, okay, I thought I did this really cool thing. I had this really cool turn, but it didn't kill the bad guy. So I guess it wasn't good enough for the DM. Like I guess he didn't like it. Like like whatever. I don't know. It just seems like a recipe for players feeling bad about their decisions,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
I don't know. I just
yeah. So Josh, you and I both enjoy the strategic part of combat as a player. We also like finding a fun build to put together, and we also like role playing. Like it's not like you can only have one or the other. But when you do that, it's like now those things are meaningless. Like the things that I find fun about the game, it doesn't matter. I don't care that you only hit the thing for 7 hit points instead of 37 hit points because you put together a sweet build for something. Like it's just empty. It's all empty.
yeah.
And I feel like this is probably most common in boss battles. And I've seen a lot of, we'll just say popular dungeon masters use, have a party that's, 5, 6, 7, 8 players big. And they just keep throwing like solo monster after their party, and then they're like surprised why it's dead in 2 turns because there's 8 things wailing on it. Like,
Yep.
add some minions. Just to me, it's lazy. Like learn how to put together an encounter for the party that's at your table. I understand that the guidelines are a little rough sometimes, and I understand that it can feel like the players are overpowering, but you have to understand that as a dungeon master, you are contributing to that in certain ways, and it's not to get down on somebody that's learning how to put an encounter together. It's not to get down on making mistakes. I have made every single mistake, I feel like, in the book at this. That's why I feel passionate about it, because when you get the extras working together, it's almost like artwork when it's like a beautiful encounter. It's like, and then
Yeah.
you just like randomly decide that something works a certain way because you feel it's better. Again, I'm just gonna say it again, like Josh said earlier. Like if everybody's on board with that in your session 0, then you know what, have fun, and just that's great. But the system isn't perfect, but it's not nearly as broken as so many people will lead you to believe.
And if you do feel that it's like completely broken, play a different game. You don't have to play this game. It's okay. One more thing I will say about this actually is I've seen it come up recently, more tweets about this, but like a while ago, I remember seeing a response from like someone who a lot of people go to for DM advice. And it was something along the lines of like 75% of players or of DMs say that they change hit points. Um, Changing hit points and foregoing hit points altogether are two completely different things.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Completely different things. And we'll talk about changing hit points in a moment. But if you need to change a hit points, you need to change hit points. If you're just deciding what happens based on what you personally think is cool, you're taking away agency from your players,
It's
and
like,
their
gee,
decisions don't matter.
we've dealt 570 points of damage to this regular goblin. I'm not really sure. It's like Randall the Vandal from Destiny. You're
Oh
like,
my gosh.
how come it takes
Well,
a million times to kill this guy? Like, what do I have to do?
and that's a fun little thing that like you can have that one goblin that has 500 hit points, whatever, and then it's a story of like, why was this one goblin so strong? What is it, like whatever. But that shouldn't be like something that happens regularly. If you want to have your one, that's like a
No.
crazy exception to the rule, just to
Yeah.
like throw off player expectations. That's whatever. But
That's a little different because it's just some like crazy super soldier serum goblin. It's like Captain America, man. If someone could make fan art of that, I would want to see a crazed goblin with a
oh
Captain
my
America
god,
shield.
I feel
Oh,
like it would look like the dude from 300 that didn't make it as a Spartan, but like still had the shield. You know what I'm talking about?
I never saw it.
Oh, Jake.
I've heard you mention that changing hit points on the fly actually there's like a skill to that. So, what are your thoughts there? Because I feel like there are times when it's appropriate and obviously times when it's not.
One thing I will say, as a exception to the rule, if you will, is changing hit points on the fly is it's kind of a necessary skill in one shots. Part of a one shot is realizing how much time you have, and most of the time when I'm playing one shots or running one shots, it's realizing that my players are spending way too much time on the first thing that I set up for them, and we
Or
need to
role
find a way
playing
to,
because we
yeah.
think it's ridiculous the characters we came up with.
But that's fine and that's fun. Everybody's having a good time. But like our most recent one shot that we did, right? There's like a first encounter with a bunch of like little dudes, supposed to be pretty quick. If I realize that if I keep those hit points the same, we're not going to be able to get to the end of this, then I'm having those hit points. And that's exactly what I did in that one shot. And they all hit harder because of it. Because I think you got to have like a little bit of a give and take there. And this
Oh
is
yeah,
just this is just I'm gonna say this is advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
I see what you did there.
Is being able to
I like
do
it.
that kind of stuff and figure out where the challenge rating is still similar to what it would have been, and the encounter is still somewhat challenging, but you're able to move forward with it. That's a completely different side of things, right? But if you're doing things like that in a regular campaign, if you guys are fighting draconians in a regular campaign, and then like one time you fight it and it has 5 hit points, and the other time you fight it and it has 30 hit points. We're all about setting expectations here. There is a set expectation for this thing is going to be kind of like this. I've fought these before, whatever. And yeah, maybe there's some metagaming in that, but that aside, your players are going to know. And that's all of these little things are like little points where you might lose trust. So while you might need to do it sometimes, I think you referred to it as like kind of like fixing a mistake.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, with setting expectations too, like if you, number one, if you make a mistake in an encounter and you just want to go after the session, be like, just so you guys know, I messed this up. So if you do encounter this creature again, it might be a little different. That's totally fine. And, you know, the hit points, the metrics, the attacks, how hard they hit, the spells they use, those are all things that it's something that the player learns, but it is also information the character would learn too. So it's fair to have a certain expectation moving forward. But yeah, if you realize that, like, oh man, I really wanted this encounter to be a lot more difficult than it was, than it seems to be playing out, then I don't think it's really that bad to fix something that you just recognize, like, this is a mistake. It should be something different than it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's different than just being like, oh well, everybody just keeps like mowing everything down, and I just, like, it's a decision to be treated with respect, and that's really,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, the point of this entire video.
I completely agree with that. Like if you have an encounter or a series of encounters where your players are just steamrolling everything, they want to be challenged, and you're like, oh, I'm going to use this monster, it's going to be great, whatever, and then you realize that they're rolling really well, it's not really working out like that. They have, usually in the stat block, it'll say this monster has 10d10 hit points, and then they'll give you the average. Use the maximum. You're allowed to do that. You shouldn't do it every time, but those are all tools and suggestions for you to use and help make your games better. And you're free to use any tool that you have available to you, and that is one of them. One thing I will mention about mistakes and hit points and expectations, since you kind of talked a little bit about that. There have been a few times, and I've told the players about it, players being Jake and the rest of the Ancient Relics and Hokey Religions crew. And this is a little behind the DM screen for you guys if you watch the show. It hasn't happened in a while, but early on, thought this was going to be like a hard encounter or whatever, and then I was like, wow, they killed those things really quickly. And I realized that that's because I was looking at their AC and not their hit points.
Yeah.
So they had like 68 hit points. But I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, you killed it in 2 turns because it was, yeah, exactly. And that's, listen, we're human. We make mistakes. It is what it is. It's just something to laugh at and move forward from. And
but I like that you mentioned it later, so that you were like, just so you know, kind of just like what I said. Like, if you do fight these again, I don't know, we'll say those were like weak, malnourished, or baby one. I don't know what we'll do, but it's different. It's different moving forward.
Like, even though you might feel embarrassed about it, it's more fair to the players to tell them about that than to not, because their characters are going to be like, oh, we fought those once before and it was really easy, and then they're going to go in, it's like fighting double the amount, but now you're using the correct hit points and they're going to get steamrolled.
Yes, because let's look at that a little deeper, right? Instead of pushing forward, or instead of taking a short or long rest, they push forward because they feel like this really isn't that dangerous of a place. I think we're good. And then you don't say anything, and now it's just different, and they get steamrolled, maybe even have a TPK, all because you didn't open your mouth and say, hey, guess what? I made a mistake. But I think instead of changing hit points on the fly, personally, I like a second wave of minions or something to come in too. And this way, everything is kind of on the same level. Like, oh, it's just more. Maybe that's cheesy too. I don't know. But for some reason, that just feels a little more believable. Like the boss calls for reinforcements and they show up. Mm-hmm. Or maybe there's some other kind of third party that is involved, or a terrainal hazard or whatever that's now showing up. That would be probably more the way I would want to handle it. That might not always make sense, or you're not inspired to change things that way, but I feel like that's where I would land on things.
That's what I prefer as well. Instead of changing hit points, it would just be like using waves of enemies. It's also a good way to make encounters more balanced without destroying your players in the action economy. If I have 20 enemies and I'm putting them out in two sets of 10, that's going to be a lot easier to overcome than 20 enemies at once, because 20 enemies at once
Oh
have
yeah.
20 actions against your 4, and
Ooh.
that could be significant.
Ooh. Yeah. So for the most part, we've gone over basically combat things and ways in which a dungeon master can, quote unquote cheat. But I think it's a larger topic than just that. I feel like metagaming, which, we do have a whole video on, as well as railroading, which we also have a video on. Really, you should subscribe and check out the rest of our content. But what do you think about metagaming and railroading, Josh?
Yeah, I totally agree. Both of those are different ways of cheating. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but if your DM is always using NPCs to attack like a specific weakness of a player character or anything, it might not be an NPC, it might be like certain puzzles or encounters or whatever it is, whether it's social exploration or anything like that. If it seems like the player character's weaknesses are always being attacked, or whatever they're going after is immune to their strengths, that's cheating, and that's not fun. Like, who wants to play in a game where the stuff they're good at isn't working and the stuff they're bad at is constantly being exploited? Like,
Like,
it
aha,
should.
I know you are a ranged character and you only fight melee things that get the jump on you.
Yeah, and it's
Always.
okay. Yeah, that's the key word, right? Because it's okay if it happens every now and then, and it's good if it happens now and then, because it's supposed to be challenging. But if it's happening a lot or all the time, then it's a problem, and you should talk to your DM about it. And railroading is kind of the same type thing, right? If you're forcing your players to do what you want them to do instead of letting them do what they want, well, you're kind of cheating, right? Player characters are trying to do something creative. They're trying to come up with that solution to the puzzle or convince that person to let them do something a certain way. Things that could or should work, but you don't want them to work, so you're not allowing it to work. That is a problem. That's cheating. It's another way to take away agency from your players, and it's going to cause problems. It's You're going to lose trust.
Yeah, I see that as kind of like the non-combat, I just ignore hit points version.
Yeah,
Really, because it's like, hey, you know what? We're just telling a story, and it's the one I want that we're all gonna tell together. My story. It's really what it is.
that's exactly what it is.
Dungeon Masters, if you're watching this and you have a story that you'd like to tell us about cheating, maybe you have some insight you'd want to share with us or anyone else that's reading the comments section, please head down there and do that. And players, has this ever happened to you before? Have you ever felt like you've been cheated by your Dungeon Master in some way or another? Let us know about it so we can all talk about it and figure out how we can grow. So, thank you so much for watching, and we hope you have a very good day. Take care, everybody.